Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in beautiful Billings. Welcome. Recently a customer of ours brought in a pattern that he wanted me to duplicate. Apparently this has been a killer pattern on the Madison. I'm not sure who ties this, who tied it. I would certainly give that person credit. I don't know. They called this the swallow. This is not the original swallow. The original swallow was tied by a man named Jack Gartsite in the early 1980s, and it used aftershaft feathers for the entire fly. So what is an aftershaft feather? Right there. All of the birds in the grouse and the partridge family have aftershaft feathers. It's simply an additional insulation. Every body feather has one. Your longest aftershaft feathers will come with the longest feathers. So if you carefully pull, for example, one of these back feathers out and make sure you get it all the way at the base, then attached to the very base of that feather is an aftershaft feather. Lots of movement. I always save mine. You never know when you're going to need some, but it's part of the price of buying that hackle. Hungarian partridge has them, all the partridges, all the quail, bobwhite, all the desert quail, all the varieties of pheasants, grouse, they all have aftershaft feathers. So it's just something to keep, and I'll show you how to utilize it in this fly. Again, this is kind of an emerger, a double collar with Hungarian partridge and the aftershaft feather. Some pheasant tail for the body. The rear half is basically a pheasant tail nymph. The front half is a little bit different. So we'll tie this thing for you. Okay, for the hook, I'm using pretty much a standard nymph hook. This happens to be a U101. So 1X long, 1X strong. This is a size 10. I'm using 14-aught Veevus orange thread. The reason I'm using such a fine thread is because I'm going to be putting this aftershaft feather in a dubbing loop, and it gets a little tight around the head. I'm going to start my thread a couple of eye lengths back to leave room for the two collars in front. Wrap a little bit of thread. I am going to rib this with some extra small copper wire. Again, I'm just trying to follow a pattern that was given to me. I'm going to counter wrap this wire. I'm going to go ahead and tie it on my side of the hook right now as I'm building my thread base. It just saves an extra step and an extra wrap of thread. The back end of this fly is really your basic pheasant tail nymph. So I'm going to take let's see what we have here. A nice even number, how about 9 Herls, just enough to get the job done. Again, pull them straight out from the quill. That evens up the tips. Instead of cutting them off, I like to tear them off. That helps to keep them together a little bit, so when you're wrapping it, makes it a little bit easier. It's not quite like herding cats. The tail looks about a half a shank length in length. Tie it down here with just 2 thread wraps, one on top of the other. Set your thread, make sure it's tight. Lift this up, bring your thread forward to just shy of where you tied your thread in. When you wrap this, do not let it twist. Keep it flat as a ribbon. If you look closely enough when you do this without twisting it, what you get is some raised kind of a micro herl, which looks like gills, makes this pheasant tail really effective. Okay, I'm back to where I started my thread. A few wraps, tie that down nice and tight. Trim that off close and then counter wrap the wire. When I'm using pheasant like this, I like to wrap my wire pretty closely. That way one tooth won't unwrap my entire fly. And this imitates swimmer type of mayflies, which have typically about 11 segments on their abdomen. I'll wrap this right up to where our thread is. Well, even the best of us break our thread now and then. I forgot I had 14-aught. So this is just called a rescue. You don't have to redo the whole fly, just restart your thread and come back to where you were. That easy. and break that off. Now this has a double hackle collar. It has Partridge and it also has the Aftershaft feather. The collar is pretty thin, so I want to use a fairly small feather. Here is the Aftershaft feather on a Hungarian Partridge, that little feather right there. I'm going to take the butt end off here, and then I'm going to tie this in by the tip. So find yourself a division point. Like that. Take a couple of hackles off the far side so that this wrap's nice and smooth. Okay. Tie this in right where your division point was. And I'm wrapping right back to where I tied off the pheasant tail. Trim off that tip. Now you're at the very tip of that hackle, so again, you can't apply a lot of tension here. You only need a couple of wraps. Make sure that hackle is vertical against the hook, and wrap back to where your thread is hanging. Well, there's 2 wraps. That's about all I can get out of that feather. 1 thread wrap to tie the hackle off, 1 thread wrap through to secure it. Always support anytime you wrap soft hackle like that. And as I said on an earlier video, you can always use a 1/2-inch tool to kind of push this back, help get things arranged around the hook. A couple of thread wraps going back will help to trap that hackle back. All right. I'm going to prep this Aftershaft feather. Before you tie this in, and we're going to do a dubbing loop here, you want to take off, you don't need but maybe 1.5 inches of this. I'm going to cut off the tail, and I'm going to cut off some of this heavy butt end. Like that, okay? And then I'm going to make a dubbing loop here. Now for me, it helps to have a little bit of dubbing wax in here so I can situate this feather. It doesn't take, this is regular low tack wax. You don't have to use extra sticky or anything like that. I like to align the butt of the feather towards the hook. That way the heavy part of the Aftershaft quill is at the back and not where I'm trying to tie it off at the front. It just makes a nicer looking head. Just try to get that feather aligned so that you're running right down the middle of it. Like that, and then we'll twist it. Now I'm using 14-aught thread, so I have to be careful about not over twisting this. I'm going to transfer my dubbing loop to hackle pliers. Now you could use your rotary vise at this time to wrap this. You want to make sure that with every wrap, stroke this material back. Try to use up all of this feather. The Aftershaft feathers vary in length according to the feather they're attached to. So the longest feathers are going to be on the rump of a pheasant, shorter feathers on other body feathers. Okay. You can imagine the movement this Aftershaft has in the water. I'm not sure what they're exactly fishing it for. Could be a mayfly emerger. It could be a large midge pupa. I think it's just one of those flies, kind of like a stimulator. It's just too good to pass up. So the orange thread will make a nice hot spot here at the head. And whip finish it. And there you go. There's no such thing as a complicated fly pattern, folks. Some just take more time than others, but it's all one piece at a time. So give that a try. You might turn just the trick for you on your next fishing trip. I wouldn't hesitate to fish this in lakes and ponds as well as rivers. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.